welcome Laura Fitton.
Thank you.
Laura basically stage dived onto Twitter about a year ago and has been carried along by the crowd ever since. And I thought she'd be a great person to come here and explain the appeal of Twitter to us and why so many people are now saying Twitter is about to take over from Google as a search engine and everything else. Laura.
Thank you.
45 minutes.
Okay, great. Well, I wouldn't say it's about to take over from Google as a search engine, but there's certainly some pretty interesting things going on in terms of what Twitter is sensing and picking up and signaling about life all over the world in real time from approximately 14 million distributed mobile phones at this point in time. And that number is growing very steeply. We saw a very clear hockey stick in April that I'll go through. Let's just open with real quick basics. Everybody raise your hand. I promise this is not calisthenic, just everybody raise your hand. Go with me, I'll explain why I'm doing this to you. Drop your hand if you do not tweet. So leave your hand up if you already know Twitter. Okay, good, thanks. By the way, if you can put them down now. If you're a presenter, that's the trick because people are too shy to put their hands up. So start with everybody up, you'll get a more accurate number. I taught presentations for about 8 years. So if my presentation stinks, you can laugh at me. All right, so Twitter, what is going on? I obviously do a lot of speaking on Twitter for Business 101. I actually, strangely enough, Twitter for Business 101 has now been taught at Harvard Business School. I know that because I was the unlucky schlub who got to do it. It went over pretty well. They didn't throw tomatoes. I was pleased. These are some of the key bullet points I go through with my business clients. I work with J&J and Ford and a bunch of other companies to help them understand the opportunity. Sadly, too many business use of Twitter people are looking at like, oh, great, new channel to market through. You know, let's figure out how to sell on this. And I take a much more holistic look. I think the important thing is to build Twitter literacy, to understand the potential, to understand where it's going, and understand how it can filter down and blend into the entire business. It's not something that belongs just up on that customer interaction layer with the marketing and sales. There's a whole lot more to it. Obviously, the Twitter ecosystem is busting out. Everybody saw this, the equivalent of a slide like this for the social media ecosystem. This is just a fraction. There's about 2,500 different apps being developed for Twitter at this point. It's very hard to find the ones you want, but there are some pretty cool ones once you get going. Even more interesting is that a lot of these apps are not Twitter apps per se, but applications that are interfacing between Twitter and a lot of other applications. So something we're learning very fast is that Twitter makes an excellent command line interface in a way, because it's a very simple UI, it's mobile, and lots of people have it and have learned it. So I, for example, update my Expenser account. You know, I get the bill and I send a direct message, which is a private tweet, and it tracks the dollar amount and the time and where I was, because it knows where I was already. I can set up Doppler through direct messages on Twitter. So it saves you having to go around to a lot of your different sites. You have that one interface. It's very simple. You go. And of course, Business Week recently picked up on kind of 20 classes of apps and all the different things that are flourishing. These apps themselves, we're actually seeing like serious VC money being put in. 2 or 3 companies have raised $2 million just for their Twitter app. Another's raised $500,000. So interesting stuff. So there's the first official tweet. I wrote to Jack and I said, Jack, I need the first tweet. There is one that's earlier than this, but he doesn't count it because it was machine generated. So if you ever see the inviting friends to Twitter, that's, no, this is the real one. And from 1 to well over 1 billion, this number is already pretty old. I think I captured this in January. It was 1.25 billion. The growth, I cannot change my slides frequently enough to keep up with the growth. It was 10 times growth when you measured it January to January. It was 14 times when you measured it just the next month. After that, so it had already doubled from November to February, more than doubled just in March. And then Oprah showed up. The weekend after Oprah did her show with Ashton Kutcher, it's estimated that over 1.5 million people joined Twitter in 2 days during Social Foo. Again, wildly outdated numbers. These were before any of that point of inflection. 2008, December, estimated that 11% of adults had used some kind of Twitter-like thing. This is research that's quite old. This is just an informal poll I did. A friend of mine wanted to write, you know, classic disruption kind of case study on Twitter, and she asked me what I thought it disrupted. I did what I always do, and I turned around and I asked Twitter, I was not surprised to see Facebook come up so highly. I was very surprised to see right down the bottom, isolation. I threw that in there almost like a wild card because I know my personal experience, I literally, May 17th, 2007 was when I first got like, oh, there's some value to this Twitter thing. At that time, I was a homebound mom of 2 kids under 2 in Boston with no business network. And seriously, if I kind of paraded out who I've had meetings with this week in the area, you'd think I was a name-dropping loser, so I won't. But it's just been an incredible way to connect my mind to people all over the world, find common interests, find mentors, find opportunities. It's really hard to explain. So why is it so valuable? I kind of recapped a couple of the big historical tweets. Anybody not familiar with this student who got out of jail in Egypt? James Buck. Its ability to detect earthquakes is often cited, and you see how remarkable the mathematicians out there, you can see how early on in that time horizon you can see that a point of inflection is happening. So when we have the right sensing tools in place, we're going to be able to pick up events in like 30, 60 seconds. As you can see in the case of this earthquake, which was last July, it took the AP 8.5 minutes to get it. The first tweet was instant, but obviously the first tweet alone wouldn't have done it, but you can see that nice strong inflection point there around 30 seconds. In the future, we'll be able to tap into real-time events as they're happening. Like I said, sensing and signaling. Giannis Krums was an internationally published photojournalist by the time he got off the Hudson River ferry that had gone to pick up survivors of the, well, thank God everybody survived, of the Hudson crash. And the reason that was able to spread so quickly and so fast was instead of just being an iPhone photo that he had to then later download, upload, maybe send to one person, it was instantly broadcast to his relatively quite small following. So here's a very first really interesting point that I want the type of minds who work at Google to be thinking about. Very weak signals that are good get picked up and echoed and radiated and propagate so quickly through the system, it almost constitutes a whole new model of influence and influencers. I do happen to have a lot of readers in the system, so I get pitched all the time, okay, tweet about my thing, da-da-da. And I try and explain to people, look, someone like me or Scoble or Loic or Gary Vee, we're tweeting 10, 20, 30 times a day. Not every single tweet is going to take off and go viral and be popular and get a lot of attention. It's much more important that you have a good, important message. So this came out of a very remote part of the Twitter network in terms of the number of followers he had. But it was instantly replicated, spread along, and passed, such that the news media had it within moments. So obviously you guys know how it works. You've seen the interface. I think why it works so powerfully is that there are so many different ways to interact with it. We don't have an inbox problem with Twitter the way we do with email, right? So some people, when they're beginning and they're trying to read every tweet, feel a bit of an inbox problem. But realistically, it's a stream. You dip into it from mobile. You dip into it from many different types of interfaces and platforms, from the website itself to a bunch of different ways to access it on your phone. You feed it into Facebook. You can pick it up in RSS. It's highly, highly versatile. And that's one of the things that's helping it gain acceptance, frankly. If you've ever considered trying to get one of your bosses or your executives or your C-level executives, God forbid, to blog, that's a huge time commitment. And it's a browser-based time commitment. Those two things are not compatible with an executive lifestyle. However, the ability to pass on mission-critical news, forward a link for an article that's important to the company, important to the work group, from your mobile while you're on the run, very well suited to executive lifestyles, among other job roles within a company. These are the kinds of things we're seeing people end up doing. The fact that I became a nano-celebrity or whatever the heck you want to call it with like a bunch of readers and stuff is a little bizarre. I'm really just kind of this mom who's really curious and gets really excited about stuff and loves business and loves seeing how things go. When you have someone who really is a star, Oprah obviously has just joined, Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher. Everybody is probably sick of hearing about how they're tweeting. They can do some stuff. I could get into the whole celebrity economy. There's a lot of backlash against it right now on Twitter, but I think the funnest part of it for the celebs is they're buying back a piece of the paparazzi economy. They're parsing out their privacy on their own terms. Companies are doing some interesting stuff. There's specific business uses, the external ones. Probably more exciting to me, because I've seen how someone's career and professional development trajectory can be affected, are the internal ones. Getting teams better connected to each other, making it easier and lightweight and faster for you to hit the entire Google ecosystem with a query, with an observation, with an important breaking article, and have that accessible and passed around without the obnoxious things like reply all. I mean, who's not sick of email burnout and reply all and those unnecessary chains that go on and on and on? The companies that have implemented Twitter-like systems internally have seen significant fall off in that type of annoying behavior. There are ways to tie it. Social Text does interesting work with their internal tool, Signals. There's ways to tie it to actual workflow so that you're kind of observing each other without that obnoxious status meeting that takes up a lot of your time. So it breaks down silos. It lubricates, communication blocks, and can create some pretty interesting network effects, again, because it's helping you harness the power of loose ties. Sometimes the randomness and silliness and streaminess of it, and activity streams focus, allows people to kind of peek in and find stuff they might not otherwise know or see. So there's a lot of ways it can build business value. Certainly in a marketing context, there's an interesting switch people are coming to terms with in social media marketing, that it's no longer about standing on a soapbox and making everybody see you. It's about talking to others. It's about providing genuine value and interest to people. I do a cute little thing here. It says, look, guys, social media is not anything new. People have always expressed artistically or record keeping the things of financial significance important to them. Social media is obviously knowledge. How do we know what we know? Usually because someone we trust has told us in some way. Knowledge is social media, ha ha ha. Markets are socially mediated. Some very interesting stuff. I know Kevin put in the description for this session the fact that is actually true. I'm a terrible shopper. I hate shopping. I will not buy anything significant without asking Twitter first. So I get this tremendous social shopping crowdsourcing thing that makes it a whole lot easier for me. Now I'm an edge case, but I'm also kind of a prototype for what could be explored. And of course, I encourage companies not to take this as their strategy for adopting social media. I'll kind of skip quicker through the ways companies can actually get started. I think we have a versioning problem here with the thumb drive, so I apologize. Some of these weren't meant to be in here. Here's some examples of the types of people using Twitter publicly in a business context. Broke them down into a couple categories here. There's a lot of executives. There's companies trying to do customer service, companies trying to build those other points on there. These are fairly old screen caps, so there's a lot of new faces and names on there. It gets pretty exciting when you can find someone who is a leader in the segment of industry you're interested in. And this amounts to a really, really pure, highly distilled Google Reader shared items, because the links they actually bother to tweet are guaranteed the best things they've seen that week. So in a way, it can be used to speed up your workflow and your knowledge absorption by getting only the highlight reel in a very highly curated way from a specific, if you will, thought leader. So companies using it in lots of different ways. Again, that's a lot of the company facing. Some of the interesting stuff that is not really happening yet, but that's out in the offing. Think about Google's fundamental objective to kind of index all the world's information, right? So a very important part of that is the real-time living web, psychographic. What are people thinking about? What are they doing at any given time? I'm sorry, these are just a bunch more examples. In the average day, how many Google searches do you guys do? Like, probably more than the average audience, but it's still maybe 5 to 10, maybe 20 Google searches in a day. About right? And each search you're giving maybe 2-3 words, maybe 5 words, and it's phenomenally interesting. I've seen down in the lobby to watch the search stream as it pours in, and you know that gives you a sense what people are thinking all over the world. Well, Twitter, at much, much smaller numbers, obviously, than the number of people searching Google, is doing something similar. So there's about 25 words in the average tweet, and people are tweeting 10, 20, 30 times a day. So they're actually, per person, for a really engaged user, giving a whole lot more words, like almost an order of magnitude more words about what they're thinking, what they're seeing, what they're observing, what's important to them. People say you're answering the question, what are you doing? But frankly, people are answering what has my attention. They're answering and also asking, what do we have in common? And the type and quality of information, just as an example, in a commercial setting is incredibly valuable, because when you go out and do focus group research and explicit market research, people freeze up a little bit and don't quite get the right natural answer about how they really feel about a product, how they really experience a problem that a product might solve, how they really interact with information. But when someone bothers to tweet about it, that's a very natural, authentic thing. So the quality of data and the volume of data that are flowing through it are potentially extremely, extremely valuable. And I think we're just starting to see good search tools, both to study how memes propagate, to study how the nodes on the network are interacting, and also to look at what people really think about things. So again, some kind of business advice on using Twitter. And some serious examples of, a question I get a lot is, well, if I'm a business and I'm using Twitter and my customers aren't on Twitter, well, who the heck cares? So we've seen, sorry, again, I'm having a little version problem here, 5 really clear off-platform benefits, right? So if you're a company and you don't even have anybody on Twitter who might use your products, say John Deere, there's probably not a big, substantial overlap of John Deere tractor customers on Twitter yet, right? So there's now and then there's future. Right away, you can get search engine optimization. If you Google the word pistachio right now, well, I don't know how it comes up in California. I know in Boston, it's always number 2 behind Wikipedia, is my Twitter account. A couple times, it's been number 1 ahead of Wikipedia, which really blows my mind. Companies are able to do research off of this. They're able to understand more about the problems that they solve. They're able to use it as a content generation engine. We've seen widgets on sites like abc.com during the State of the Union that were relaying content from people related to the actual event as it was unfolding live. There's a very strong word of mouth pass along, and as a PR tool, it's pretty insane, largely because the journalists have jumped on it so fast. And I can, kind of go through the details on that. But I really want to skip through a lot of this real set, what businesses need to know about Twitter, and get into your specific questions, because I don't know what composition of people from what parts of Google we got here. But obviously, this is a company where there's a lot of really interesting research going on, a lot of understanding of search dynamics, data. And I'd like to hear from you questions, and I would like to hear from you your thoughts on the dynamicism of the system, and the types of things that Google might need to be able to understand to adapt to it. So I'm going to leave this one up so we can talk about it later after some questions. But any questions now? Challenges, things you want to call me on? And I forgot to start with my signature line, which is Twitter's the stupidest app you've ever seen. It is not the software. It is very hard to understand when you first see it. And it's only after you catch a specific use case that seems interesting and helpful to you that it gets really exciting. So maybe some of you who actually use Twitter, I'd love to hear some of your stories about like, oh, wow, I was going to Geneva and I didn't know where to eat. And I asked and got some great restaurant tips. Even for something that simple, it can be really exciting and interesting. Are we not a big question and answer audience? Great, thanks. You don't. You totally don't. Twitter has, one of the nice things about Twitter versus Facebook is the asymmetry. But they really need a third type of relationship, which I call permit DMs. The only reason my account Pistachio follows everybody back is so that they may send me a private message, because I'm in a business context and I have some visibility and it's kind of manners. If I could find a way to do that without actually following all those people, it'd be helpful. Because frankly, spammers bounce off accounts like mine in order to ratchet up their Twitter follows, because mine's on auto follow back. And the reality is that I use a separate account to actually read Twitter. So of the 30,000 people reading me, they've all been followed back. The number's a little different because of the spam churn. People follow you, wait for you to follow back, and then unfollow you. Yeah. But I use a separate account for people I actually know. Also, I use a lot of search tools. I myself consume Twitter in about 5 different ways. Yes?
Why do you say that Twitter is a threat to Google, and you think it's a bigger threat to Google or to Facebook?
I didn't catch the whole question. Why do I think?
Why do you say Twitter is a threat to Google?
Those were Kevin's words. Other people are saying that. I wouldn't see it as a threat to Google, but frankly, I've been scratching my head for about a year now about why Google hasn't tried to buy it yet. Because of that fire hose, it is a constant consumer sentiment engine. It is a constant signaling and sensing of what's going on worldwide. You know, simple stuff like earthquakes and wildfires, but also much more subtle things. If you get the right search tool in place, it is no problem with natural language understanding to pick out focus groups, right? You could pretty easily track down 500 25 to 35-year-old moms who happen to live in the Midwest, right? Keep it anonymous, I hope, that no one's going to unethically go in and start stalking people. But for commercial use, you get 500 women, you understand their demographic because you've been watching the content of their streams. Now you can wait and detect trends within a very specific group. So if you are a marketer and you want to know what is the day of the year those moms start thinking about their Christmas shopping, you know, have you guys all heard the Pop-Tart story with Walmart? They watch the hurricane forecast like crazy, because Pop-Tarts are the first thing to sell out when a hurricane's coming. Who knew, right? So now that we have something like this that could potentially be picking up, you know, and again, it's going to be much more powerful if it goes full-on mainstream. But with the current growth, it's projected to be 350 million people by August 22nd, if that growth keeps up. I'm not saying it's going to keep up. Don't email me in August and be like, haha, you were wrong. The reason I left the Zappos example up here is he's not, you know, people know that Tony Hsieh, the CEO of Zappos, is tweeting a lot personally himself. Most people have heard that he encourages his employees to tweet, so he actually has 1 in 4 employees tweeting back and forth to each other and tweeting out to customers and just kind of interacting and being part of the brand out there in the open. He also literally has every single brand that he sells. He has a Twitter search set up, so you click through onto any of those, and you're seeing, you know, a mix of false, we need better search tools. You're seeing a mix of false positives. So in this case, the brand is freestyle. So there's plenty of people saying the word freestyle. It doesn't really work that well. But if you take a more unique brand, you're seeing a constant stream of opinions, ideas, people interacting with the product, thoughts about it. I think that type of commercial information, especially when you interface it with, you know, obviously AdWords is a pretty important step towards what is the future of media and how does advertising and commerce work and how does media not collapse on itself. When you start looking at whatever next 3 things are coming down the pike, the live web, whether Twitter goes away tomorrow, the genie is out of the bottle on social networks that are mobile, that are based on very short messages, preferably with embedded link context, because that's very helpful, but short messages that ricochet and fly all over the place. And that's one of the big differences between Facebook and Twitter right now is Facebook doesn't have dynamic message flow in the way Twitter has, like not even a fraction of it. And that dynamicism is creating some really valuable data that I would think Google would want to be on top of. Ellen?
To answer the question, I was at a Google meeting in London a few weeks back and we were talking about Twitter, and someone said, well, this organizes and makes useful the world's information. And I think that's something that, since that's our mission statement, something we should pay attention to.
It's, yeah, and I'm not the only person saying this. I've heard a couple other people predict like price points and time frames. And obviously there's rumors all the time about is Google going to acquire Twitter, but there's rumors about will Microsoft, will Facebook, will...
I actually bring it up for an answer to the question of threat rather than acquisition. So what are the tools that would allow this data to be mined in a way that gives an expediency and a return, even a relevancy beyond Twitter? I don't know that that's a legitimate question, but it's a question we've all heard answered, and I think we need to listen to it.
Yeah, and I think it is a pretty important question. I was privileged enough to go to Foo Camp out east in Boston, and was actually surprised that I kept falling into my usual, what the heck is the value of Twitter? It looks so stupid conversation, and was having it with Jennifer Hayes out there, who I didn't even know who she was. I was so lucky to even be there. And I didn't really understand the magnitude of that until a few days later it showed up on Business Week that she was launching a research project to follow up and try and study some of the things that I've observed and some of the things that I predict are going to happen. So I think there are a lot of people looking very closely at it, building some sophisticated search tools, building sophisticated analysis and understanding what's in this fire hose, how do we parse it? You know, it just seems like so much of what gets done here. Yes, you.
I just saw a report that says among the new users of Twitter, only 40% return the month after. So if suppose that's true, do you see that as a problem or an intrinsic property of the tweeting behavior?
So a problem I've perceived for a long time, and I'm not alone in this, because the first time I ever met Ev Williams, it was like the first question he asked me. There's a really big on-ramp problem with Twitter because it is such a stupid app. You're staring at that interface and going, why would I say what I'm doing? Who cares what I had for lunch, right? I'm not surprised. I'm actually surprised the numbers weren't worse. I saw that figure last night that 60% abandoned the accounts. I know in my own case, I abandoned my account for about 8 weeks until I saw, I kept hearing all this hype. This was back in 2007. I was actually relatively late to the game on Twitter. So I think we will see a lot of abandonment, but I think if Twitter itself or if the developers in the Twitter ecosystem come up with some more critical use cases, I think the people will come back. I think we're seeing a curve a lot like email adoption. When people first got email accounts, they weren't that useful because not many other people they knew in their social graph had email accounts. They weren't that useful because the very earliest email accounts didn't even talk to each other. They could only talk to other people within the same node. So there's a trend I see is that Twitter will start to talk to, well, it already does talk to Facebook in the sense that you can use a single client to follow both. Kind of the IM model of aggregation and interoperability. But I think these little status updates are floating around into a lot of different types of applications and software, and that they will be able to speak to one another in the future. And you don't get a ton of value out of a sole fax machine. You need to build up that network effect and see that thing in your life that's relevant. For me, it was being home-based, working alone, not having colleagues, and watching a guy out here in the valley tweet the different meetings he was taking. It was just so inspiring. And it's so old school. Surround yourself with successful people. That was the use case that did it for me. The use case that did it for Guy Kawasaki was that he could find rumors for Trumors. That was what he wanted to do, and he was wasting so much time in his RSS reader every day trying to pick through and find them. When I showed them how they float up quickly on Twitter, he's like, wow. And then he went off and found a bunch of other uses. I think the fact that it can do so many different things and it's hard to hone in on the useful thing for you will cause a lot of trouble until that gets worked out, and we will keep seeing drop-off. But I do think people will come back. In the back, because you haven't asked yet.
What kind of issues has Twitter had with spam?
What issues has Twitter had with spam? Excellent question. A couple aspects of the environment of the ecosystem make it unspammable in some ways, but there are a lot of other, there's been a couple of security breaches, there's been some spam, there's been some actual attacks. The one thing that makes it a little bit less spammy is that it's opt-in, it's publish, subscribe. You don't have to follow any stream you don't want to follow. And you even have some control over who follows your stream. And so that means if someone comes out there and they're obnoxious and they're just pitching you all the time and providing absolutely no utility, you don't have to follow them, and you can actively block them. Where that's going to fall apart, and people haven't fully really appreciated this yet, is, and I should switch over to our back channel. The convention of hashtags in Twitter, that's the tagging convention for Twitter, is to use a # and a word. That's a totally uncontrolled namespace, and unfortunately, as a result, it's completely hackable. It's completely spammable. @ replies, the fact that when you put the @ sign and then someone's username, it shows up on their page whether they follow you or not. Unfortunately, that's quite spammable as well. And I'm not sure how Twitter will be able to respond to that. One thing I have seen is accounts that come in and start doing @ reply spam. So if they were like, @ Pistachio, blah, 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 @ Kevin Marks, blah, 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 @ Scobalizer, blah, 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 and they're saying the same message over and over, Twitter will step in and shut them down. The other type of abuse we're seeing is people taking advantage of scripts, auto-follow, and a couple other things to jack up their follower numbers. So when you go into Twitter and you see someone has 60,000 followers, the perception used to be, wow, they must be contributing something valuable and interesting. Yeah, I can't get it off of that. Thank you. Kevin's secret locked computer. All right, so a few of you have tweeted. Thank you. more spam problems will come. Twitter's fighting it aggressively. They have one technical person already on board just to fight spam, and they have a customer service person coming on board to fight spam. There was another question back there. You've been waiting a while.
You've talked a lot about the opportunities available through Twitter. Does Twitter itself have monetization issues, and what do you think are the next monetization steps for Twitter?
So I talked a lot about the companies that are building apps through Twitter. What do I think about Twitter's monetization issues, and what was the last part of that?
What do you think are the next steps?
The next steps, okay. So first I'll disclose I'm advisor to a couple of the Twitter apps, TipJoy and CoTweet. And I also have a startup myself that is related to the whole Twitter ecosystem. It's kind of a Twitter revenue play. I've never been that worried about the monetization thing. I get asked that in my press interviews almost all the time, just because that's the really popular question to ask. I see it very much like early settlers are a little wagon train, and then they circle, and maybe there's a little interchange between families. Oh, you have sugar, I have lard, whatever. But there's not much commercial activity. And then an ecosystem grows, a community grows. Next thing you know, it's a raging metropolis, and just the fact that there's so many people in one place means there's all kinds of commercial opportunity. And Google, obviously, is the poster child for this, has done a phenomenal job of channeling. I mean, attention and traffic are what make real estate value. And the way Google has approached that and found revenue models after all the other stuff was worked out has worked phenomenally for Google. Will Twitter be able to replicate that? I think they'll be able to take some of the lessons from it. I think the fact that so much commerce is already going on within the ecosystem, so many people find each other, build out their business networks, find leads. This is quite a serious lead generation tool, among many other things it can do for business. I think the trick will just be ascertaining what's going on economically and how to tap into that for a fair share of it. For example, I'm shocked how much data they give away for free, because frankly, that pipe of data that can be searched and parsed is extremely valuable. And it may be that they're just waiting for the mass audience and the right tools to be built, and then they'll put a price tag on the data. I mean, there's so many things they could put a price tag on now without ticking off the average users that I'm actually personally not too worried about it at all, but lots of people are.
So Twitter has been around for more than 3 years, roughly, and nothing much happened. And sometime in 2000, it seems to have tipped, across the tipping point. So the question is, why did it not happen sooner? And what happened in 2008 that caused it to cross the tipping point? And what is currently driving its growth?
All right. Again, I didn't hear the very last thing you said.
What is driving the growth currently today for Twitter?
What I'm sorry. What's driving the growth today? Okay. Great questions. Why didn't it happen before? I would say the on-ramp problem is a big one, because too many people, the number of the 40 to 60%, where 60% abandon and 40% stay, was much worse. It was more like 1 to 10 in the early stages of it. It looks so stupid on the surface that people have a really hard time wrapping their brain around why it's not stupid. And, of course, the technical problems. I mean, a year ago, there were plenty of people saying, well, Twitter's going to lose to Identica, it's going to lose to Plurk, it's down too much. The fail whale made its debut and rise to cult status. The network itself was not scaling. It was designed as a content management system, and really it's a message relay system, so they had to re-architect. Biz described the process as, your body's constantly regenerating all its cells. They kind of had to regenerate the code bit by bit over a course of several months to totally re-architect that scalability. Why it's taking off now, you can point to a few obvious things. News events. The Hudson River crash kicked off its own flurry. When you look carefully at the growth curve, and I'm not going to go all the way back in the presentation to it, but you can see October, there was a lot of election activity that leveled off as soon as the election happened in November. And then Mumbai over Thanksgiving started to take it off again. So everything that brought it up onto the world's radar, into the international media scene, has been driving the current growth. I hope they solve the on-ramp problem enough that the growth starts being more generally viral as opposed to media-driven. Because, yes, certainly the recent stuff has been very media-driven. The 1.5 million in one weekend, that's just the Oprah effect. So it's going to be really interesting to see. One of the cool things about it, those of you who are not on Twitter right now, you can literally take out your mobile phone, send the text with the word join to 40 404, and you now have a Twitter account. And it pings you back, and it says, oh, no, and feel free to do it. And imagine, okay, so one thing I'd like people to imagine is how could this be used for nonprofits? Say there's a wonderful speaker talking about a charitable issue to an audience of 1,000 people who've never heard of Twitter. They could literally, you know, like an orchestra conductor, have everybody take out their phones, sign up, tweet a message about the charity, tweet observations about the world issue, and that would trend on the search page because there was a sudden influx of things, you know, because you can do payments through Twitter. They could do real live fundraising from people's mobiles while they're in their seats focused on the issue, as opposed to hoping they go home and remember, hoping they send in the form. There's a lot of stuff that can happen in real time, and I think episodes and events of that are going to drive future growth too. How are we doing on time here? Oh, great. Okay, awesome. Let's do more Q&A. Kevin. Yes. So there's a group called Charity Water, charitywater.org, all one word, that has become a bit of a poster child for the charity most often used for things on Twitter. Biz simply put it in an email last August that they were going to have this September birthday things, and a couple people like Pete Cashmore at Mashable did September birthdays where they did fundraising for Charity Water and promoted it on Twitter. Twitter's a neat thing for fundraising because you're sending out these little messages that are very easily repeated and passed on to other people. And in fact, there's kind of an ethic where if something's really interesting, it does get passed along. Those messages can have a fundraising link embedded right in them. Beth Cantor, who's probably one of the best thinkers on nonprofits and social media, stood on stage at Gnomedex and raised $2,500 in about half an hour, both using the audience at Gnomedex and also the messages they were relaying out to the rest of the world, people bringing attention in. In Charity Water's specific case, the next big event that happened with them was my own thing. So it's been odd to end up in just 2 short years having this like audience. It's not something I ever sought out, cultivated, developed, hoped for. And I have a love-hate relationship with it. I'm very grateful. I've been lucky. But I don't have kind of, you know, the Scobalizer social media, like I want to be a big boy personality. So right before Christmas, I was struggling with some things, and one of them was like, what the heck is the point of all this? So I said, well, you know, I want to do something useful and meaningful for Christmas. I'm going to ask for $25,000, which to me just seemed like so outrageously too much money, for my Twitter followers, for Charity Water, to go build wells in the third world, because 4,000 kids a day die for lack of clean water. And really that amounted to just $2 per follower. And Tipjoy, the company that does, they're like a PayPal for Twitter. There's a couple others. I'm now an advisor because we worked together on this project and we liked each other so much. They stepped up and said, we'll do it with absolutely no cost. So people were tweeting $2 into my charity, and it spread like wildfire across the network. Over 1,000 different people contributed. There were like 20 or 30,000 page views. I was able to raise $25,000 in about 3 weeks. But even cooler, and this gets to my influencer versus influential message model, was a woman named Amanda in London who had maybe 1,000 followers, where I had like, 12,000 to 20,000. She came up with an idea. Hey guys, how about you organize a tweet up in your town all on the same day, and we'll support Charity Water. So in 3 weeks, just by Twittering about it, 202 events, 10,000 individuals, $250,000 raised in 3 weeks with no major corporate sponsors. Yeah, there were some sponsors on there, but they didn't kick in big money or organizing infrastructure. It was all self-organized organically on this mobile network. I think we're going to see a lot of really phenomenal examples of that moving forward too. It was pretty cool to watch.
How do governments like China, India, Saudi Arabia use Twitter?
And how do governments like the U.S. view Twitter? There's been some interesting papers on the security risks. The fact that it is mobile and it is very good at ad hoc events is fun when you're talking about, oh, hey, let's go have a beer, and kind of scary when you're talking about, hey, let's plan an attack. The fact that the public things at least are trackable is nice. That's helpful. But I think some pretty serious thinking and research needs to go into looking at how is this going to be used. Now, the repressive governments that you specifically asked about, it's an incredibly important question, because after the cyclone in Myanmar, when aid workers weren't even getting in, where situations on the ground, we were having mad rumors about what's actually there, and the government was being so repressive about it, I was able to find 4 or 5 Twitter streams trickling up, because it's very hard to harness and control someone on their mobile sending something out there. And they were not so much able to provide extensive reporting about situations on the ground, but they were able to link to the few blog posts that were getting out. They were able to link to the few photos that were getting out. Obviously, in the case where James Buck was arrested in Egypt, and as they dragged him off to jail with his hand in his pocket, he thumbed the word arrested, and therefore was rescued very quickly. That's going to invert the kind of control that they exert over people. At the Olympics, people using Nokia N95s connected, again, feeding into Twitter the way Giannis Krum's picture of the plane in the Hudson was immediately broadcast out. If you have a Nokia N95, you can stream live video right to the web using Flixwagon or Quick or any number of different things. And as the video starts streaming live, it will ping Twitter. So when I do this for goofy stuff like the tires getting stolen off my car one morning last winter, which was thrilling, that message goes out immediately, and people watch it in real time, and it's streamed to the web in real time. So during the Olympics in China, some of the pro-Tibet protests were picked up by people with N95s on Quick. People were predictably detained, but the video was already out there, and not just out there at one website, but out there socially among a wide graph, who very quickly relayed the tweets, and the videos got spread very fast. So there is a lot of significance for repressive governments, and I hope it changes them. One of the reasons I am obviously frothing at the mouth with Kool-Aid over Twitter. I make no apologies for the fact that I am not an unbiased observer. But one of the reasons I am is, while my work is business use of Twitter, it's business because, that's where the money is, right? Why do you rob banks? That's where the money is. The thing that excites me the most is what can happen to people when they're connected one-to-one on these networks. What happens if you have little digital SMA-based pen pals from the Sudan and from Kashmir, talking to each other and knowing a little bit more about each other growing up, and coming up with that being the normal thing, that there are interfaces between these wildly different cultures, that there are interfaces between one-to-one, that messages don't have to get channeled up a big media pipe and siphoned down to the one thing that's going to come back down to the everybody, but that the everybody can watch each other and find their own interests and do their own action around it. I think there's a lot of social action, freedom, government repercussions. Again, not necessarily for Twitter itself, but for this thing that's out of the bottle now, the thing that I call micro-sharing, which is the global, mobile, one-to-one, social network-powered short message exchange.
So I'm not on Twitter. I haven't used Twitter so far. Yep. But I'm wondering, how do you deal with overload?
How do you deal with overload?
Yeah.
A great question. Most people who get pretty actively into it see it as a stream of information flowing by. So the question would be, how do you deal with the fact that your cable TV is on 500 channels 24 hours a day, right? You turn it on when you want to watch, and you turn it off when you don't. You use a content guide to see what shows might be on that you might want to see. In the case of Twitter, that whole user multi-face thing I showed, you can be just passively watching keyword search and only see the tweets about a keyword. You can, one of my favorite things to do is I drop by friends' pages. If I'm stuck on a train or a delayed flight, I just pop around friends' pages and see what they're up to. So the time it would take on the phone to catch up with 20 friends in one day would be your whole day. But the time it takes on Twitter to just see, what's Kevin up to, what's Joshua up to, what's going on, is something you can do very quickly and easily without getting overloaded, because you're electing to go in and look at it. Now, that said, it is a little addictive. So you have to kind of channel your behavior and have some objectives for what you want to get out of it. But the companies that are really worried, we can't let our employees tweet. They'll tweet all day. They'll waste time. Sure. And their job performance will fall off. And hopefully your company knows how to manage job performance. Because frankly, somebody who's really going to slack off can slack off smoking, drinking coffee, going and irritating their cubicle mates. You got to manage the behavior, not the tool. Everybody said the same thing about web browsers when they came into the workplace, email when it came into the workplace, even the telephone. When the telephone first came to the workplace, it was we'll just talk to each other all day. I mean, heck, maybe even the telegraph. I don't know. A lot of the stuff people think is new is ancient. Any other questions? You guys have been great. I want to let you out early because that's another good presentation habit. Anybody who wants to stick around is welcome to. But no group was ever unhappy to be sent home early. Well, maybe kids who could have had candy. I don't know. You guys have been amazing. I really appreciate you coming out for this. And please, whoever wants to hang around a little while. Thank you.